Be ready to be shocked. This video is about the deepest level of prophecy in songs, and we're going to talk about a kiss that is so powerful. It's truly the most powerful kiss in the world, and it's in the Bible. There's a woman that we read of in Song of Solomon, and she starts off, after explaining that she's busy with the Song of Songs, which belongs not to her but to Solomon. She heads straight into asking this groom, yearning for him to come and kiss her. From the unison between the bride and the groom comes the life. Now, take a step back. Who's the groom? Messiah. Messiah gives us life by being united to what? What is his suitable helper? It's taking the death verdict. In other words, being united to the fiery justice of God. Right? Who can help the Messiah bring forth life and redemption to us? You can search for as long as you want. You're not going to find a suitable helper other than him fulfilling the death verdict. And it helps him to redeem. I hope it's clear. But yeah, you've got to know that in order to understand what she says next when she says she desires a kiss from her groom. Let him kiss me. Now in the Hebrew, the word kiss has a tie in the root thereof to grabbing. The fire is telling the Messiah, come and grab me really tightly like a weapon. Get a hold of me. And she says it must be done with that kiss, with that cleaving, with that grabbing hold of her, of his mouth. Now, if you think about a mouth, the word there, if you think about just your face, you see it's a type of edge, type of end there. And in the mouth, it's the place where from you breathe out. And in the Hebrew word for mouth, the root, it goes to blowing out, scattering. So she says to him, let Jesus cleave death by breathing out breath. In other words, let him die. She says, for his love. Now what's translated there as love, the root word of that in the Hebrew ties with boiling. If you think about Psalm 22, describes the crucifixion in extreme detail. Everything that happened there is there in a prophecy by David long before the Messiah came. You'll find that similar image of taking the heat, the one that is the sent one of God, the Messiah would be like his bones would be melting as if like a candle, right? It's in the midst of boiling. So this woman, the Isha, the fire, the bride, the justice of God would have him boil. And that is the choice wine. Jesus explained the wine is his blood, and the choice is the preferred blood. Other word for choice in the Hebrew ties goes to preferred. So if we read this again, going into the depth of prophecy, understanding the groom is the Messiah, the woman calls for him, and she's the justice, fire, wrath of God. She says, grab me. Lock onto me like with a kiss, because you love and respect me. Jesus, you love God's justice. You don't go against it. You respect it. Come and get hold of me like a weapon. Come and cleave me with your blowing out, with your mouth. The boiling is the choice, the preferred wine. Preferred blood testimony. Jesus is the fulfillment of all the sacrificial lambs in the Jewish sacrificial system. In actual fact, he was dying on the cross. It was the moment when the lamb died in the temple at the time of 3. And his blood is the blood whereto all those lambs pointed. It is the choice blood testimony. And in the Hebrew we find in the blood fermenting, right, effervescing. It's almost like cooking, boiling image as well. He was bleeding in the wrath of God, boiling, while grabbing on and fastening to her. And so she became a weapon in his hand, whereby we live. Remember, it's the groom and the bride that wants to produce life, because we can live, because he died. Words that she now speaks ties precisely with where she left off. That word, in other places we find that word being used to speak of the smell of sacrifices that pleased God. So she's saying the smell, in other words, in Hebrew, the root there goes to ruach. He accepts the sacrifice. Jesus' sacrifice was accepted by God. He is the preferred blood testimony that God accepts to pardon us. Remember, she is the bride wanting to be with the groom, and in their being together there will come forth life. So she says, your sacrificial breath that pleases God is, there we find, it is abundant. The word that's translated as oil, in its root, it ties with shining. If you think about oil, sort of that yellow golden glow that it has to it, and it's used when it comes together with fire, it burns the fire, right? It's bright and it's greasy and it's abundant and it's rich. Jesus breathed out his breath, his ruach that was accepted by God when God accepted his death there on the cross, his sacrifice. There came this almost like oil that's burning. There came bright light across the earth. At the exact moment he released his breath. At the time of 3, being the sacrifice that all the other sacrifices pointed to, when in the temple the lamb was being slaughtered, Jesus outside on the cross released his breath, and the sacrifice pleased the Lord, and bright light poured. Darkness that was on the earth between 12 and 3 was gone. It was shining bright, well-favored oil that was emptied out, right? And then we find she says, thy name. Now in Hebrew, the word for name ties with your report. What is the report of Jesus? What is his, also ties with renown. What is his renown? What do we know him for? That he died, that he breathed out his breath to save us. So his name, his renown, his report is now over, in the Hebrew word that we don't see there in the English, but it's over the virgins. What is it with virgins? We know that Jesus spoke of us like the virgin party, but it is so beautiful because in the virgin we find the veiled, the covered ones. We are hidden in him. So his name is over the virgins. Jesus' name is over us. His report is over those that are hidden in him. The Christian virgin party, right? And you need to stay true to him, having your oil lamp there, right? Your lamp filled with his well-favored shining light that comes by his breath. Now, what is Jesus' name? We've spoken thereof. It is Yahushua. In other words, God is salvation. So she says, God is salvation's testimony. Jesus died, and therefore God can save us. Testimony is over the hidden ones, is over the ones that's covered by him. And his name in the what is translated there in English as God, in the Hebrew ties with Yah. Right? It is Genesis 2 that's active there. We find God gives life by breathing out his breath. That's how he gave life to the very first human being there, in the literal bringing this generations of human beings that we all belong to life because of his breath. We live by the breath of God. And the same way we are redeemed. Remember, it's so beautiful, she says, it's his breath, his sweet-smelling sacrificial breath that pleases God, the smell, and then the oil, right, the shining light that came exactly when he did that is well-favored, shining light. And it was poured forth. His name, his report, God's salvation is now over the Christians, the virgin party. Can you see? Can you see the depth of this and how it perfectly ties with the previous verse where she just spoke about his blood testimony? That is so choice. And now she finds that the light that comes by him, that shining, abundant richness that comes from him dying, that is choice of God, because thereby God's salvation is now over us. And she carries on because it's his song and it goes, it's like somebody speaking. And she's now explained that his breath is the preferred breath that's released to give the preferred abundant, rich light there to mankind. And it becomes what is the report of God's salvation that can be over the hidden ones, those that's hidden in the Messiah. And she now says what's required. After Jesus breathed out his breath, what happened to him? He was placed in the tomb. So what does she do? She says, draw me. In other words, he must pull her after him. All right? She wants to go all the way after him. She's the fiery justice wrath of God that keeps on hunting Jesus. The woman of songs is hunting the groom. All right? The groom is the Messiah. The wrath of God goes after Jesus, running after him. Have you ever seen a fire? It's like sometimes a horrific image of a fire in the field, where when there's breath. Oh, I just thought about that. When you breathe out, there's oxygen in the air, and it flares up the fire. It makes you jump around. Can you see? I sometimes think we're living in a prophecy of Jesus. It's incredible. And here it is again. She's spoken about his release of breath in the previous verse, and now she says she's flaring up. She's running after him. She's running after him, and where is she running? The king is going into the chambers. Jesus with a crown of thorns, the king. There's a prophecy in him being, remember, son of David is a prophetic title there, a messianic title. Jesus born from that line, fulfilling that, but there's many people born from that line, and only one of them is the Messiah, it is him. Because son of David in his naming prophecy has a root that goes to boiling. He's the son in Hebrew ties with a likeness, right? He's the likeness of boiling, the crowned, thorned, reddened king. Jesus was blood red. David is associated with the warrior that is the red one. Jesus was warring death. He was overcoming the damnation of mankind by being united to the justice of God that was taken from God, redirected back at him. And she's coming for him. She says, we will run. That crowned king, right? Jesus, the fulfillment of David, has brought me the fiery justice and wrath of God, that leaping fire that goes after him with the release of breath, the oxygen in the air. She goes after him into his chambers. That word in the Hebrew ties with a bed chamber. She goes to his bed. What was the bed? Jesus' deathbed, remember? She goes into the tomb with him. Now what is translated there in the gladness, right? Apart from the fact that they're happy, remember who's happy here? It is God's justice that's satisfied. Remember, he's now fulfilled it. And it is Jesus, because it's God's salvation, that is happy and satisfied, because he's busy building a way to save. So they will rejoice. It is God being true to himself, coming up with a master plan to redeem us and give love, when there's supposed to be none, because we're guilty. But he's having this unison of his justice and wrath. He has it love one another and rejoice together. And the word for rejoice there in the Hebrew ties with turn, right? We will be turning. She's supposed to come after us and bring death, but he's now going to make her the mother of life. Can you see the turning? He's ruling over her and making it the keeper of the vineyards. Okay, that's in the next verse. Can you see it goes on? It explains how God's judicial system works. You're going to find in the very next verse, and the one that comes after that, she's going to speak about we mustn't frown on her. She's the justice and wrath of God. We mustn't frown on it, and she's going to explain why. And she's going to speak about being the keeper of the vineyards, and in vineyards there's an association with the grapes and the blood testimony, but also it goes to a garden. The garden is a defense system. Now you got to stay with this, because can you see like every single verse is just following one another in this conversation that's so deep that the woman is talking here? And it is the prophecy of prophecies. It's the testimony of Jesus in a mind-blowing way. It explains exactly how God works. It's the reasoning of the redemptive process that happened in Jesus that's busy in this conversation between the justice, fire, and Jesus in the song. Okay, so she's saying to us in the very next two verses that we're going to deal with, she's saying we mustn't frown on her. In other words, she's saying we mustn't be negative about the justice of God. We mustn't be angry about his death verdict. We mustn't look down on it and think it's a bad thing. Because we can't, nothing that God does is bad. And his justice system is perfect and beautiful and suitable to bring redemption. And she's going to explain that. In the next verse, we're going to find her explaining why we mustn't frown on God's justice and wrath, because she's lovely and suitable to bring peace. Okay. To bring peace, she explains. And you're going to hear that in the next instance when we go into the actual verse. And in the one that comes after that, she gives us another reason why we mustn't frown on her. She's saying, listen, I didn't act in my own interest. I'm the fire, I'm the justice, I'm the wrath. I could have had you all. But I didn't do that. I didn't take care of my own vineyard. Vineyard in Hebrew ties with a defense, because it ties with a garden. Garden in Hebrew goes in the Canaan to a root that goes to a fenced-in place, a defense. She is guarding. She's taking care of the defense system of God by having Jesus. Let's say that again. Because the justice and wrath of God took Jesus down, she had him. Instead of taking all of mankind, she took him. And now, being united to him, she guards God's defense system against the death verdict. So she's working sort of against herself because she took him. She can't no longer have everybody on earth. She cannot have the hidden ones. So she worked against herself. And she didn't keep her own defense, her own vineyard, her own garden. We're going to see that in the next 2 verses that we're going to speak about today. Can you see? Okay, so let's go into the text. First, read together what she says. And there's slightly different word order because, well, if we don't do that, it's a little bit harder to hear. Okay. So going into the original order, she says, dark eye, but lovely, daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar, as the curtains of Solomon. Dark in Hebrew ties with death. We find it in the very beginning in Genesis, and you can think about the time when Jesus was on the cross. There was darkness. Dark. We also find the going dusky, going into darkness. There's an association with dark and death. So she's saying, who is she? She's the justice of God. She's the death verdict. She's saying dark and dusky eye. Yes, indeed, the fire bride is exactly that. But, and here it comes, why we mustn't frown on her. Lovely, suitable, because it is God's judgment that we're talking about. It's not our own. And of course, God's judgment is right. Right? So it is the suitable one. And that word, it just takes you back to Genesis, because there it is said of the woman, she's the only suitable helper of the Messiah. And she is death, she's darkness, but suitable. And we find that it is daughters is the next word that she says. And daughters in the root thereof goes to building up. Because, well, through the daughters there come more babies, the family is being built up. So it is the building up of, and in Jerusalem there's a tie with shalom and peace. So she says, I may be dark, I may be death, but I'm so lovely and suitable to build up peace. Isn't that true of the justice and wrath of God? Because without it, if Jesus didn't die, how can there be pronounced life to us? How can the hidden ones be covered by the renown of his name, by report of God saves through breathing out breath? Of course, she's the lovely, suitable one to build up peace. And she goes on, and she has a type of a simile there in the image of tents, right? A tent, if you think about a tent, it's a place where you can be covered in, a dwelling, right? So it's like the covering or the dwelling of, and in Kedar there's association with darkness again, death, okay, mourning. So what is she saying? She's saying, dusky darkness am I, death am I, but I'm the suitable helper, I'm lovely, it's God's justice, for building up peace as the dwelling place of death and mourning, indeed, at the cross. As the hanging, the curtain, if you think about a curtain, what is it other than something is hanging? Okay, in the Hebrew, the word in its root means hanging. Like the hanging of Messiah. right, to the groom. She's saying, death am I, but I'm suitable, I'm lovely because I'm God's justice, she says, building up peace. That's what she's suitable for. As the dwelling of darkness and mourning, Jesus on the cross, the darkness on the earth, the hanging of Messiah. And you see, that's why we must not frown on God's justice. Now she's going to give us the second reason why we mustn't frown on her being darkening. Right? The darkness starts with death in the Hebrew. So we mustn't frown upon her being the death verdict. Because whatever God does, it is good. And it's His justice system. It's obviously good. Okay, so it is a good thing that there is a just system and that God acts on it. Do not frown upon me because I am darkness, she says. But the reason that she gives is she's saying, I don't look after myself. I looked after God's defense system. So how does this work? She speaks about, if you look at the end of that verse, she says, they made me the keeper of the vineyards. Let's first look at that. We find there the children, it's translated also from the Hebrew. Children ties with building up. We've spoken thereof already because the family is being built up. The more children you have, the more they can have, and the bigger the family becomes. So it's the building up of my mother, right? It's a building up that comes from the mother. The mother in Hebrew ties with the word that goes to departure, because it's the place where from the baby departs. So her departure's building up was heated, all right? For her to turn away from us was a heated affair. In terms of she had to go and have Jesus instead of us. And by doing so, she wasn't looking after herself. She says, they made me the keeper of the vineyards, but my own I haven't kept. In other words, vineyards in Hebrew ties with defense. It has another possible interpretation as a garden. And it is thus a place that's fenced in, a defense place. God plants the garden. That word in the Hebrew goes to a defense. God gives us the defense system wherein we are safe against the death verdict. So now she's working against herself. It's logical if you think about that. If Jesus didn't take the death verdict, it seeks fulfillment in us. So by Him taking it, He keeps her away from us. So she's departing from us because she had Him. She now keeps intact a way to block her from us. She's the keeper of the defense system, the keeper of the vineyard, the keeper of the garden, the keeper of what's in the vineyard, the blood testimony of Jesus. She keeps it because she took Him. And that works against her and sends her off. Alright? She didn't keep her own. If you think about what the fire could have eaten, if you think about an earthly fire, it's like, think about the image of a field fire, just keep on consuming. That is what it should have ended up. The whole world should have ended in all of us being in that boiling fire of hers. She could have fed herself crazily on us. But she didn't, because she loves who? The groom. God's justice loves salvation. God doesn't want to burn us up. He doesn't want us to be destroyed. He wants to save us. His justice, her, loves Jesus, God's salvation. And now it is not looking after His own interests in its ability to come after us. It's looking after God's ability, Messiah, Jesus' interest, coming to save us. She's the keeper of the garden system of God, the defense system of God, being united to the groom. And indeed she is. And she's not taking care of her own defenses. She's not saying, I will not take Jesus and now I can have you all. Do not look upon me because I'm death. Do not look upon me because I'm God's darkening, fury, wrath in fire, fiery justice. She says, because the sun, and in Hebrew that does with the brightest one, has pierced me, has looked upon me, ties was pierced, right? Jesus, when He died, the light came, He breathed out His breath, the brightest one is Him. Literal, not the literal sun, but His prophecy there. She's now the keeper of God's defense system against us having her. And that's not looking after her own interest. So don't frown on the death verdict, she says. In the very previous line, she says, because she's suitable to bring peace. It's the only way that we can have peace is by her having him. And she's also the one that guards God's defenses. So one day when you and I are standing before God, we are accused by Satan saying we're sinners, we must have death, she must come for us. She gets turned away from us because she's guarding the defense system in God's salvation. She had him. Jesus died. She can't have us. She's looking after the testimony of Jesus because she had him. Now she goes away from us. And thereby, we must not frown on her. We can have redemption. She's, after all, the God of it. She's, after all, in unison to him, turned by him into the mother of life. Awesome. Can you see how she explains redemption? And here we find the conclusion in terms of her final before the groom speaks. All right, she says, tell me, O thou my soul loveth. Isn't this beautiful? Because who she is, she's God's wrath and justice that's supposed to consume us. And what does she love? Jesus. God's salvation. God giving life to us. He has his justice. Love is salvation. He says, tell me, God's salvation, where do you feedeth? Where do you make your flock to rest at noon? For why should I be the one that turneth aside by the flocks of thy companions? In other words, why shouldn't she have, in Hebrew, that word for the flock ties with migrating ones? Remember, we are like in the image of the flock, the sheep. We are migrating. Where are we migrating to? We're migrating into heaven. And why should she be turned away from us in our migration there? Aside? Why should she turn aside? Why should the wrath of God no longer come after us? Because Jesus, he died. All right? He, at noon, at 12, was on the cross when the darkness was coming. At noon is the very time when he did have her, in the time of 12 o'clock, noontime. It is the time when the darkness was over the earth on the cross while he was busy pasturing and making rest, busy dying. All right, pressing out oil. It's also tied with that midday image, the noontime. It's a brilliant, bright light time, but the darkness came over him and he was busy pressing out oil. There's a lot of prophecy. We're going to speak about that in other videos. But remember, he came from the Mountain of Olives, where he was the previous night going into the judgment and then going on to, and then he was being pressed in the grip. Remember, she wants to be grabbed. It was in that pressing out of oil. Olive oil. He's the crushed olive that renders the oil. Right? He was sitting probably under an olive tree, that tree that we read of in Gethsemane, and that place's name ties with the oil press. It is the place of his arrest. He was taken from the Mountain of Olives like an olive to be going pressed. So she says, show me, where do you make oil? At that oil making time, where do you give your greenery, your life? Where do you lie down? Your death testimony. It was on the cross. For if she doesn't witness that, how should I be, why should I be the one that's covered, aside, turned away from the flock? So why should the death verdict be turned away from us, his companions? In other words, the disciples went and they ministered to the world, and now there's a whole immense flock. Why should the death verdict legitimately be turned away, be covered, be veiled, not being able to touch us, away from us? She says to him that she loves, show me. Why must I turn away? Where do you shepherd? On the cross. Where do you make rest? He died on the cross. When did it happen? At noon, at 12, when the darkness came. And what did he do? He was pressing out oil. And when he breathed out his breath that you spoke of in the previous verses, you remember that sweet-smelling sacrifice breath of his? It was abundant oil that was being pressed out. The light came. When oil comes together with fire, there's the light. God's prophecies are deep, profound. And if it opened, it becomes clear. And it's no longer you can always think, yo, this is so beautiful and so clear, because he speaks in imagery of a bride and a groom that we understand, about love that comes from the unison and the life that comes from the love. And we can understand because God is just and God is wanting to save us, and those two parts of him love one another. There is love, there is forgiveness, and she indeed can be turned away because he pastured us, the Good Shepherd, on the cross. He made rest, he died, he took his own rest. There's a prophecy there, it goes into Genesis, we're going to speak about that as well. Remember, God's the one that rested after his work. Jesus rested in his death after his work of saving us, and he was pressing out oil, and therefore when he breathed out his breath, ignited, the oil and the light came, coming from Gethsemane. How dense can that be? It is only God that can write a song like this, open it, and have the unlikely one, a woman, but the even more unlikely one, the prophecy in her, the fiery justice and wrath of God, sing the song of the Messiah, that is the song of Solomon, peace. This woman sings peace because he did show her where he made rest, at 12, where he pressed out the oil, coming from Gethsemane and melting on the cross. And there, because of that, she is to turn away from us. God is awesome, he loves you. In the next video, we're going to speak about what the groom tells her. Isn't this perfect? Perfect Song of Songs, the most beautiful song in the world.